Hey folks, Tyler here. I am popping in to let you know that this is an old recorded episode, which means that you will hear me refer to myself and Aidan refer to me as Lena. Just wanted to give you some context because now I don't use that name anymore and I go by Tyler. So, anyway, grab your coffee and enjoy.
Welcome back to another Cozy Cafe Chat. Grab your coffee and join us for another philosophical and silly discussion. I'm Aidan.
And I'm Lena. Let's get into it. So today we are going to be talking about productivity culture in capitalism.
Woo!
Super fun. Not heavy at all.
So relevant.
So relevant.
Always.
But first, before we jump in, let's start with, what are we drinking?
So today we are both, today is still the same day we did our first episode. We thought we'd mention that. But more coffee, why not? So we're drinking actually a little bit different. One of the La Colombe coffees, canned triple shot draft latte. Foamy nitrous-infused milk and cold brew.
Oh, she's just reading
I'm literally reading the can because I don't know what else to say.
Natural caffeine. Real ingredients. Do not shake.
Do not shake. Do not shake. Let's just read it all. Nutrition facts. But this is a pretty popular brand. So we thought we would also try things that are like widely available throughout the country in grocery stores. But this is La Colombe Coffee Roasters are actually based in Michigan. Yes. And they've created supposedly like high quality canned coffee.
Supposedly like she's not drinking it right now.
It's pretty good for a canned coffee.
It's good.
I wouldn't normally drink it because it does have sugar and dairy milk, but like, you know, for the sake of the podcast, I gotta try everything. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good. My sister, shout out to Annika, is obsessed with these. So Annika, in honor of you, and also this is what Lena found at the grocery store.
Yeah, this is what was available. It wasn't the grocery store, it was Target.
Excuse me. Well, Target's basically a grocery store.
Shout out to Target.
They have like their own grocery.
Speaking of capitalism and productivity, if you're a Target employee and want to tell us about your horror stories at Target, email us.
Yeah. Or one of the La Colombe coffee roasters.
Oh yeah.
Worker. Yeah. Any levels of production.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Tell us
about
your exploitation, and we will highlight it.
Yep.
Safely.
Or happy experiences.
If there are those. If there are some.
Mm-hmm.
It's questionable.
Because
capitalism.
I'm repeating everything. We do that with each other. Did you want to say anything about this?
About this? No, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's it. And Aidan keeps shaking the fucking table.
I do. I need to stop.
She's putting her foot on my shaky. This is like not even a table. It's like a nightstand that like we use as a makeshift table in this apartment. And now she's slamming shit down on the table. It's fine. We love to make noise.
I'm a very twitchy person.
Whoa. Okay, let's get into today's topic. We're going to be talking about productivity culture in capitalism. And there's a lot to be said about productivity culture in capitalism.
Yep, a shit ton. We could go on, which we probably will.
Can and will.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that a good place to start with this topic is to think about the current context of the pandemic. And I know that that's contentious because some people are like, the pandemic is gone. And it's not, let's be honest.
To normal.
Everything's normal again, whatever the fuck that means.
Whatever the fuck that ever was.
Yeah, as if there was ever any kind of positive normal that we really wanted to stick to. But there has been a lot of conversation around productivity, particularly with work from home.
Yep.
And the idea that people should be producing the same amount of labor, work quality during a time of mass trauma. And I think that's like really relevant right now. What are your thoughts, Aidan?
I totally agree. Very, very relevant. I have a couple thoughts on that, on like the concept as a whole as it pertains to U.S. capitalist American culture, but then also in light of the pandemic. I guess I'll start off with just kind of my personal observations and feelings about this quote-unquote reopening process. And I won't dwell too much on COVID and the pandemic, but like you brought it up, I mean, it's really so incredibly pertinent because it is like the context in which we're living, so like we kind of have to mention it. And it does really pertain to this topic. So it's interesting because I don't know if you've like felt like this at all, but as the economy has begun that reopening process, again, I kind of say that with air quotes because what does that really mean? I've almost felt, not almost, I have felt very uneasy about it for many reasons. Like, obviously because COVID is still present, and thank goodness for large-scale vaccinations, but I feel like it's premature to reopen in the ways that have been occurring. But that's kind of another topic. I guess in regards to productivity culture, I'll admit, like, I mean, I am a person with a lot of anxiety in general, but I've had, like, more anxiety with this reopening because of, and I know a lot of people have too, so I think this is probably, like, a shared feeling, anxiety disorder or not, or just anxiety in general. But, like, the idea that, like you said, people should have, quote unquote, should have, and I'm saying this all as in, like, this very toxic capitalist oriented narrative, but that, like, first of all, we should have been producing at this same standard as before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now that everything is reopening, it's like, let's go back to that and more, because everything's normal again, and we've learned all these things from the pandemic, which clearly, like, people are forgetting, and, like, what have we actually learned? And so then it's just, like, I get this sense of urgency, and, like, it's almost this, like, energy in certain facets of everyday life of, like, this rush, which is so characteristic of that, like, high productivity, fast-paced American mindset. It's like, I feel it so intensely and uniquely, and it's almost like I feel like I can't catch my breath. Like, we're going, everybody is like, all right, back to work, back to traffic everywhere, back to going all these places, back to large events. And frankly, it's terrifying. And I think too, even though ironically, like, I worked throughout the pandemic, like, I was lucky to have, for the most part, still both of my jobs, and I was able to go outside of the home and work because I worked at a coffee shop that was open. Fails, obviously. But I think just the idea of everyone going back to this, like, again, fast-paced, high-intensity, productivity-oriented everyday life, when there's really still a pandemic going on, is just, it's so jarring and overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that something that you're bringing up that's really important is this idea that, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this, that the pandemic has really made a lot of, I mean, some people not think about it, but many people reevaluate what was quote-unquote normal before, and did we need to be doing that much? Did it need to be at that pace? And I think that that's the thing that's really interesting is we, as we've been talking about, this has been like a massive traumatic experience, like collective trauma. But I think the thing that I think about a lot is, what about, yes, we're all experiencing that and we should be taking a break now, and relaxing and, like, you know, self-care, which I know we'll talk about more, but, like, this idea that what we were doing before was not considering that people, first of all, there's collective trauma in various communities for various reasons, that also has been brought to light during the pandemic. I mean, it's been talked about before, but obviously, like, with the murder of George Floyd and you know, Black Lives Matter, and talking about racism as a pandemic, and thinking about how all of these things were just, like, things to push through, right? Like, the idea that as a society we value labor and products, like literally getting out a certain level of products over basic human dignity and human life was very evident. And so it's interesting because you're right. You're thinking now going back to quote unquote normal. Why, right? Like, why was this normal in the first place? We all experience different, needs, difficulties in life, and the idea that we are supposed to just push through them. I mean, even the thing of, oh, you should just go to work when you're sick. I mean, that is such a narrative in our culture.
Such a narrative.
And I mean, there's obvious reasons now why, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, right? And like immunocompromised people exist outside of the pandemic. Like, they existed before, and like we should not have been doing that. But there's this push, and that push is, I think, like you're saying, getting stronger right now.
Yes, 100%. I think it is important to acknowledge, like you did.
Aidan touched my foot yet again.
Their foot. Yes. The collective trauma in so many different facets, and how like this pandemic has been collective trauma, and that is largely disregarded. And it is this idea that we need to push through, and like pushing through is such a theme and narrative within our culture at large. And that makes me think about two, I guess, narrative / sayings that I feel like really encapsulate what we're talking about. And one is more, and this is what I was thinking about as you introduced this topic. One is this idea that lack of sleep is like a badge of honor. And I've like noticed that from such an early age, which is just so interesting that like I remember as early as like my early years, that is gonna leave. Hearing adults talk about like being so tired, working so hard, and just like lamenting it, but also there's always this suggestion of like, that means I'm successful.
I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
And so it's this capitalist American model of success, and that success comes at the cost of our physical and emotional well-being. And lack of sleep, I feel like, is a physical... What?
I'm laughing because I said before you... You
like know what I was going to say?
I'm like in anticipation of your points.
A physical embodiment of that. Like a physical, somewhat tangible indication. And then I remember, like, for me as early as middle school, and then especially in high school, especially in college, just having those discussions of, like, how little we slept. And just that's always such a conversation. And in so many different circles, there is that theme of the less you sleep, the harder you're working. And it's highly problematic in so many ways. And it does, like, I'm seeing as we're talking about this, how much it all relates to self-care, which, like Lena said, we'll talk about more as well. And along with that, this is definitely like a saying / motto some people have, but the work hard, play hard. Or work hard, play harder, depending on how it's used. I feel like it's very relevant to this too, because it's this idea of like opposition. I feel like kind of you have to work really hard and sometimes be miserable doing it, so that then you can let loose, go to the opposite end of that, where there's this like, in that kind of, it's almost like a binary opposition. There is a lack of middle ground. I don't know. Does that kind of make sense?
100%. This makes me think of kind of the like self-policing nature of most forms of oppression, and in a capitalist society, the form of oppression of, I mean, like, just literally like of the proletariat. You know what I mean? And the idea that like it is. Right, there's this narrative, and it comes from this idea of like, oh yeah, like, CEOs tell you work hard, play hard, or work hard, play hard, or, like, no sleep, just work. That's not a phrase. That's not a phrase.
Sleep, just work.
It's a very not catchy phrase. But like this idea that like, right, it's a badge of honor, and then that you then start policing other members of your class in this kind of behavior and expecting the same from others. And also how when you distract a group of oppressed people from addressing their recognizing their oppression, the way that you can do that is, I mean, by exhaustion.
Yes.
When you're exhausted, you don't have the time and energy to spend dealing with your oppression. You also don't have the physical or emotional well-being. You can also classify them as they're mentally unwell, so they don't know what they're talking about, right? They're unfit to think for themselves or explore this their own specific needs. And it also keeps people feeling okay, yes, I'm going to be miserable, but that's just inherent in the in working in a capitalist society. But because I get to veg out on the couch later today, watching a bunch of movies. But once again, it's don't get me wrong, I think that there's, of course, a bunch of artistic value and all entertainment and even going out and doing things for yourself. But I do think that it's pushed in specifically a consumerist way. Go buy things. That's going to make you feel better, which is going to make you, further in debt, which is going to
further fuel our capitalist economy.
Exactly. And it's always things that are going to benefit the group as a whole and not you individually, which is going to force you to kind of be in this consistent cycle of never actually addressing your real needs or desires.
Overconsume, overspend, so that then you work more, and then there's this cycle.
Yes.
And I think it is really important what you bring up about oppression, and it is all so related, because it's capitalism is inherently disadvantaging certain groups.
Yes.
It is inherently oppressive, no matter what anyone can say. That is the nature of capitalism. And as a economic system, as a cultural, political system, of which it is all of that, it holds humans as machines. And the more people are equated with machines and producing things. I'm gonna take that out. The more dehumanizing it is.
Yes.
And at the core, it's dehumanizing. And dehumanization is such an element of oppression.
Right.
And really, vice versa, too. The more dehumanization there is, the more oppression, and vice versa, too. Okay, I said vice versa twice.
And vice versa, too.
And vice versa, too.
Vice versa,
okay,
3.
Vice versa, 4 now. But I was going to say something else about that. So, humans as machines, dehumanization. It also serves to keep people in, quote unquote, their places.
Yes.
Those in power who are contributing in creating this unequal capitalist hierarchy are the ones dictating who stays in what position.
Right. Right. And pushing this idea of, no, but you can make it to where I am if only you just try. And my favorite is that narrative when behind so many billionaires and a self-made success. It's and they got $120,000 loan from their parents, and also they lived at home until they were 30. Okay, no shit. If you have generational wealth, of course you're going to be able to become an entrepreneur and do these kinds of things that yes, maybe you have the ideas, but you also have the capital and the power and the privilege. Exactly. The other thing I was thinking of when you're talking about the dehumanization piece, a big part of the conversation of productivity that I think is really important, particularly when we're thinking about mental health and the mental health field, is the way that we treat those with more severe mental illness, and specifically those who are lower functioning when it comes to work in particular, but also socially. But I think work specifically, there's such a narrative around, if you cannot produce as a quote unquote functional member of society, well, really functional member of society translates to somebody who's going to make money for the economy and also participate by, like, you know, being a consumer. If they're not willing to, like, partake in that specific way, they are not a functional member of society. That's such a cornerstone.
Yep.
Ah, yes. The beautiful sounds of Jersey City and Aidan kicking
the table because I cannot help myself, I guess.
It's a deep-seated need to kick this table. But it's so relevant that, you know, there's this narrative of, like, who is a contributing member of society. Yes. And that always aggravates, you know, it's a similar thing with also conversations about, like, houseless folks and thinking about, like, oh, well, like, this person isn't contributing to society, or, like, unemployment, you know, I'm unemployed, so I'm not contributing. That is such bullshit. Of course that's not what actual human experience is, but because of that, the, you know, folks are marginalized, pushed off to the side, and to be honest, it's not talked about in this productivity lens. It's often like, oh, well, like, they're harmful to themselves or others, or, you know, I feel uncomfortable around this person for some reason, but it's never thought about in this way. But that's at the cornerstone of why these folks are even marginalized in the first place.
Yeah. It also makes me think about, in light of immigration.
Yeah.
And where undocumented immigrants, again, within this lens and this perspective of this toxic capitalism, are seen as, or viewed as, like, members of society who basically don't count, when in reality the big irony within that is that undocumented immigrants are often the backbone of our economy. It's like our economy would not work without just immigrants in general, but again, in light of the narrative around undocumented immigrants and immigration in recent years, and especially in the recent administration that will not be named, but probably.
I think that's really important, and I also think in that narrative alone too, right? Like the idea that, because I remember when there were conversations about, like, you know, when Trump was elected, and even before he was elected, when he was running for office, the whole conversation, the kind of response that people had to, oh, like, the, you know, the rapists, murderers, whatever, was, no, like, they're contributing, like, members of society, but, like, who cares, right? Like, if you are an undocumented immigrant and you're not doing anything, you're a human being who deserves rights, and that's the thing that can be kind of frustrating. Even in that is, like, there's also this narrative, similar in other marginalized groups, of, well, no, but this person actually does contribute, and why is that, like, for so many people, the automatic defense, as if that makes their life inherently more valuable.
And that is such a response to the capitalist narrative of, like, in order to be a valuable and worthy person, you must produce, you must contribute. And that's, like, so culturally embedded. Like, that is not an objective way of looking at things. Like, it is deeply embedded in the context of productivity and capitalism that we're talking about. And so that's actually such a good point. Like, I know I even, like, find myself using that argument, and like, unfortunately, it works.
Yeah, it does.
Especially when talking with somebody who is very much minded, like, in capitalist minded.
Right.
Just touched your leg now.
I know, you keep getting closer to me.
I do, because I keep thinking my voice isn't getting. It's fine.
Look, your voice is being heard.
My voice is being heard.
I need to be heard.
I was gonna say something about. Oh, and I think it's important too to, like, I keep saying like. We say like a lot.
Yeah.
I think it is also important to acknowledge the colonialist implications of this too, and how, like, capitalism and colonialism go so hand in hand, and so much of these narratives and these mindsets, like, are colonialist mindsets. I don't know, do you want to speak to that at all? I'm trying to, like...
No, I know what you mean. I mean, I think that's an important point. And to be honest, it also comes from the speaking to, like, colonization and imperialism. I think that this also relates to, and this is something that is very frustrating as well, the conversation about other countries. And I mean, first of all, I think the term third world country alone, right? Like, that alone speaks to these cultural mindsets that people's lives in a certain country are less valuable for the reasons that the infrastructure is different, or whatever reason that is, which doesn't also recognize the impact of colonialism on these existing infrastructures, which is a whole other thing. But I do think that that's reflected in the way that we as a capitalist society view other groups of people. And when we think about the conversation about immigrants, undocumented or not, there's an idea that people from certain countries are more valuable. Part of that is race, culture. Like there's multiple elements to that. One of the elements is also the perceived productivity of that host country, or not the host country, sorry, the home country of the immigrant.
Country of origin.
Country of origin, yeah. And what the level of productivity is perceived to be, or like understood to be, and how that the idea that like somebody else is going to taint our way of living, which we have done, but through colonization and imperialism, actively going other places and fucking with people's lives, because it's our way of life is superior, and so that of course challenges that.
I love that. It also,
you good?
I have a little pace. It also
She's got cheese in her throat.
Yeah.
Literally.
It also makes me think about capitalism and particularly our Western notion of capitalism in contrast to communism, and also our notions of communism. And it is really interesting because, like, as you were talking earlier, we were both talking earlier about this, false notion of people as machines and overworking people and the power structures there. It's interesting because when you pare it down to that, like, the way that this productivity culture demands people to act in a collective sense so closely mirrors the sort of communism that the U.S. as a whole, and United States folks, I never want to say Americans, in general, are so adverse to. They so closely mirror each other. Like, there's all of this disdain for the, and I'll say this here, like, I would consider myself probably, and I'm still kind of figuring out what I would say my political orientation is, but I'm definitely, like, socialist in certain ways. I think that a socialist economy and system would be a lot more beneficial. I'm not at all going to, like, I know that obviously communism has severe issues. At the same time, I think it is important to recognize, like, what I was about to say, that when capitalism goes to that extreme, that is absolutely the reality here in the U.S. Like, overworking, people as machines, dehumanization, it so closely mirrors the sort of communism, again, that the U.S. has such disdain for. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and when it's similar in both ways, in both what's it called? Ideologies, the way that it's implemented has an impact. I do think that in capitalism particularly, there is more inherent oppression, like in like the written theory of it,
And the written theory is very different, and that's the thing. It's very different than
actual implementation.
Actual implementation.
And it's very arguable, and I'm not even gonna bother getting into this, but like it's very arguable that any, like, especially with communism, that any like institution of communism was actually like rooted in communist, like Marxist theory specifically. Exactly. That's very debatable. I mean, many people have various opinions on that, but yeah, no, it's the whole concept of hating in others and despising in others the thing that you yourself do, right? Like, I mean, that's on a human level, that's a very real thing. Like thinking, oh man, I hate when this person does this. And then that's something that secretly you also are doing.
Yep.
You might just not be conscious of it.
Exactly.
But, oh my gosh, Aidan, you are so close to me. Because it, like, guys.
I'm so not that close.
You are so close. Okay,
Look
here.
at this.
You want me to move
Look
this?
at this right now.
Well, now you're less close. I also want to stretch out, that's fine.
I also am going to put that
Listen,
there.
folks, it is so fucking hot in this apartment.
Oh,
We're doing okay, but the power went off for a little bit. It was a whole thing. We got through it. The power is now on, but I'm scared to plug in too many because we have multiple ACs plugged in.
Yeah.
I'm too scared to plug in the other ones, so we only have one. And Aidan keeps putting her body near my body, which does not help with heat.
My body wants the AC.
Well, so does mine. Also, your body is closer to the AC.
Is it really? No,
You're
it's
more
not.
in the line of the AC.
Oh, okay, well, who chose that side of the couch? That would be you. Anyway, back to productivity. Let's do our podcast.
Yeah, let's
produce. See, this is why we're only doing one a month, because, we have to take our time. That makes me think, actually, to sort of switch gears within the same topic, but I'm curious to hear about, because we have talked about our thoughts at large, which is important, but I'm curious to hear, I shared a little bit, but about your personal experience with this mentality and culture of productivity within our form of capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have always had a contentious relationship with it simply because I'm lazy and I don't want to do shit. But that's at the core of my being. No, I mean, that's not inaccurate.
Quick, though, but see how, okay, and I totally interrupted you, but I had to say this, these narratives around laziness, and it's and again, I think important to acknowledge, which we haven't, even though we do with each other, but right here, it's important to acknowledge, we are not in any way beyond or outside of capitalism.
No.
We are very much products of it.
Yeah.
We perpetuate it on a daily basis. We can
I don't know about that.
excuse me. Who buys food? I was gonna say food on Instagram, clothes on Instagram every day. I don't know.
Not every day.
You've gone to package every day. Okay.
I have a problem. It's fine. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. We'll have a whole episode on
No,
it.
I very
But,
much,
It's interesting.
Totally
Important to recognize that we're products of it, perpetuate it. We can abhor it and also love it at the same time. And we know this and we're aware of it, and it's always something to work on, but I think it is important to acknowledge here, in light of what we're talking about. And then also with that, the notions, the sort of guilt that we are made to feel for quote-unquote not doing things.
Right.
And what lazy is a culturally charged term.
That's true.
Language is charged, and culture and linguistic relative.
Right, it's very relative,
too. But
no, that's a good point.
But
I mean, I think that's accurate.
You are lazy and don't want to do shit. I'm just kidding.
Both can be true.
Both can be true.
Yes, and.
But anyway, yes, and.
As
that is
any
the
good
key.
improv student will tell you. Improv student. I don't think people consider themselves improv students. Improv losers. I don't know. So sorry.
Improv stars.
Stars of the show. I think that right now what's interesting is, so I was in grad school. I started grad school right before the pandemic, and it was interesting to have that switch because I definitely felt like see, you are making so much noise. Can you hold off on the water for 2 minutes?
I'm a twitchy person.
I know. I'm so excited to do this when you're not in the same room as me. When can you leave now? I'm kidding.
Same day as you.
Oh yeah. Anyway, back on track. So I started grad school right before the pandemic, and during the pandemic, it was very interesting to see that shift personally. I was lucky that I was able to adjust. My hours got severely reduced at work, but I was able to adapt, and I have a lot of financial privilege, obviously. But it definitely impacted. I felt like almost because things were on Zoom, I felt more inclined to do more because almost, it's so easy to log on. I need to do more. I need to be doing more. And so I ended up doing a lot. And things that I'm really grateful that I participated in. But I started out the the semester last year, the fall semester of 2020, realizing that I had bitten off more than I can chew to some degree, and that was once again influenced by these feelings of I am not being productive enough, I am not contributing in the ways that I want to. And some of that was valid because some of the work was really important work that I needed to be a part of, and it wasn't capitalist, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like financially driven, it was like socially driven, which is more important, I think. But that's, I think, something that's kind of come up recently. And right now, I am actually, as I like to say, underemployed. I am finding work. And because of that, I, one, am enjoying myself because I'm very lucky to have money saved and to be able to live in a stable manner for the period of time until I do get a new job. But I do find myself feeling that, like, residual guilt because, and also I feel guilty because I enjoy it. You know, this thing of exactly. I enjoy time off, and then you feel this sense of I should not enjoy time off this much. When in reality, that's, you know, a very shared human characteristic and human experience.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And this starts at such a young age. Like, you know, I'm thinking in, like you said earlier on, like towards the beginning, about the notion that we should go to work and school when we're sick.
Yes.
And you should stay up so late doing your homework to finish it and do well. And that means you're a good student. And you should overwork yourself because that means you're dedicated and not lazy, and you'll make money and be happy and continue fueling capitalism. Right. And so it's like these things, we learn them either both in our families and at school and then beyond. And I definitely do relate to a lot of what you're saying. I think I have a lot of perfectionist tendencies and like I would say toxic perfectionism. Like it's very much been an issue I've dealt with most I can't talk. Most of my life. Yeah. So I think for me this culture is toxic in the sense that I definitely I fall victim to it in that I define my self-worth by how much I do, how well I do at it, and like what are those accomplishments and accolades, you know? Like what can I say, what can I list? Like this has always been, and part of it is I have a lot of interests and like I'm very enthusiastic about a lot of different things, so there is that. And then there is also that like I just feel this immense pressure, and this doesn't really come from my family, like I'm thankful and lucky to say, but I have very much like fallen prey to these larger forces of society that we are discussing, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and just like felt this immense pressure to always be going, always be doing it well and doing it more. And so ever since I can remember in school, it's been like, how much can I do and be able to do it well? Yeah. And that's to me, such a clear, like, product of that productivity mindset. And, you know, what is this when you really, like, step back? It's like, what is this all for? It's, you could argue, so that I can be a more successful contributing member of society. And those terms being in the cultural context we've spoken of, like successful and productive. That sounded so weird suddenly. Productive being culturally charged terms. So I think that it's always been a huge challenge for me because my goals for years now that I'm always trying to like reorient myself around are like have to do with doing less, pausing more, prioritizing downtime. And you talked about guilt, and I definitely feel a lot of guilt for when I do that or when I don't do enough, whatever that may be. But like defining my self-worth by how much I do produce, etc. And it is very toxic at its core, which And I don't know how much more we want to talk about, but...
I think a final thought
yeah.
that sums this up and actually would be a good segue into, it might not be next episode, who fucking knows, but another topic that we'll definitely get to is the relationship between academia specifically and the education system, and how it perpetuates this sense of guilt and high expectations in relation to productivity at an early age.
Yeah.
And we both have families that are like rooted in academia, which does come with a lot of benefits in a lot of ways, because, you know, I always felt prepared for academic settings in ways that I know that others didn't. But it does have a lot of pressure, and the point is that it shouldn't have the pressure for anybody. Like, it just shouldn't exist in the way that it does.
Exactly.
And I know there's a lot of problems within academia related to productivity that I'm sure we could like get a lot into in another episode.
Yeah. Stay tuned for that. I also want to say, I think it's interesting because like how we're ending off, there's various different routes and ways we can go, and something I also wanted to mention that we'll likely have an episode on as well, and I wanted to mention it. We have mentioned throughout this episode self-care, and we want to do an episode on that. It is a lot of these are broad topics, and we by no means are going to like cover the entire topic, just obviously that's impossible. But a phrase that kind of keeps circling around in my head is self-care is resistance. And I think that's something we'll talk about in light of all this, that actually like practicing self-care is an act of resistance against capitalism, against colonialism, etc. And I think it will be interesting to dig into that more. So what we've mentioned are going to be 2 other topics we'll discuss at a further time. There's so much more we could say, but I think
we've covered it.
We've covered
what we wanted to cover.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys probably have thoughts too.
Yeah, which we'd love to hear.
Yeah. All right, so before we wrap this episode up, we wanted to introduce a new segment in this podcast, recommendations. Cue music. Okay. So I'll go with my recommendation first.
What
is recommendation? The people are clamoring to know. Our single listener is really curious. So us as one entity. So this is going to be different shows, movies, music, artists, books, thoughts. I don't know, like theories, whatever the hell we want to recommend. Because if you've been listening to this, clearly you, for some reason, care about our opinions. So why not hear more? We are opinionated people. We have a lot to say. So here's some recommendations. So I will go first. My recommendation is an artist. Her name is Mitski. She is amazing, and we recently listened to some of her music on a road trip that we did. And I thought that I would shout her out. She is the queen of yearning. So if you're a yearning human being and love, listen to her music. If you have good taste and good earbuds, listen. Earbuds?
Ear holes?
What are those called?
Earbuds?
No, like the ear canals?
Canals? Because the earbuds are the like little mini headphones.
Right, that's not what I mean. I mean, yeah, like listen to her in headphones too.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want. But yeah, go listen to Mitski. Stream her many albums. All of them are good.
Yeah, she's really great. I had heard a couple songs, and then we played through her most recent album, and I was sold. So I can second that. I'm gonna recommend a book. So maybe this is a contentious topic. I don't think so, but perhaps it is. I am right now reading. I haven't finished it. Almost finished with Harper Lee's sequel to To Kill a Mockingbird, Go Set a Watchman. I say this may be contentious because, can you hand it to me? I wanted to look at the year it was published. Because this was a much anticipated sequel to horror.
To horror. This was a much anticipated sequel to the horror. The horror
to her.
Just start that
early.
Again.
Okay, I'm gonna start this whole thing.
Just describe what it is again.
Okay.
I think we can salvage the beginning.
So, So I'm going to recommend Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee, the acclaimed author of To Kill a Mockingbird, her 1930s novel. This is a much anticipated sequel that took years and years to publish. Published in 2015, so relatively recent. And I had been wanting to read this for several years. And now I am reading it. I'm almost done with it. And I'm kind of like in the thick of it, so it's very much on my mind, and I just like, I wanted to give it a shout out and recommend it. I could go into detail, but I will spare you all. Basically, in a very brief nutshell, this is 20 years later. No, what am I saying? Scout is 26 years old. That's what I can tell you. I guess it was 20 years later. But she's lives in New York City and has come back to visit her father in Macomb, Alabama. That's all I'll tell you. So it's decades later and set amidst the backdrop of increasing civil rights tensions. So, you know, unfortunately very relevant to this day right now. And I personally think it's really great. I love Harper Lee's writing. I loved To Kill a Mockingbird. I read that my freshman year in high school, so it's been a minute. I mean, even if you don't remember much of To Kill a Mockingbird, still very, very worth it. You know, it is a classic, and it did take decades for this book to come out, the sequel. So I understand that some people may not be, like, huge fans of it. I can say I am. I'm very sold. I love having an older Scout's perspective, Jean Louise, as she goes now. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. It is very much a page-turner, a couple hundred pages, very, very engaging. So sit down and read Go Set a Watchman.
Sit down, shut up, and read.
Wait, did the power go out? Thank you so much for listening to Cozy Cafe Chats. We will have our next episode out within the next month.
All right, and make sure if you like listening to us drone on for an hour. Or if you don't, well, too bad. No, I'm just kidding. You can subscribe to us on whatever podcast machine you're listening on. And you can also like leave a review. That's a thing that people do, right? I think on Apple Podcasts. I don't know. We're new to this.
I think you can on Spotify too.
Bear with me. And you also should follow us on social media because you'll probably get more information about Timeline there. It is on Instagram and Twitter, Cozy Cafe Chats. So just the name of the podcast. And if you want to email us and tell us that we're wrong and that productivity is inherently what defines someone's worth, go ahead and send it to our spam inbox at cozycafechats@gmail.com. We probably will never agree with you, but
we'll
you
chat
might as well
about
send
it.
it. Send that email.
Yep.
You want to tell us that your grandma made you a good lunch today? We'd love to hear about it.
Love to hear it.
We'd also love to hear any stories about animals.
Always animals. Or
Always animals.
Pictures of
Pictures of animals. Any
Only
pictures
animals.
of animals. No
Coffee.
humans. If I see any humans on there, I'm blocking immediately. All
Animals,
right.
coffee. All right. That's Cozy Cafe Chats, and we will see you
next
later.
time.